ECG extravaganza. ECG extravaganza. ECG extravaganza. ECG extravaganza. ECG extravaganza. ECG.
Well, hi there, everybody, and welcome back to the ECG extravaganza. Yep, it just keeps getting more exciting. So today what we're going to talk about is the PR interval, or the PRI. You might see it shorthanded to, but the PR interval is just a measurement that we look at on the ECG that helps tell us some stuff about the patient's condition, which we'll get into a bit later. But since we're just going through the PQRST and the basics, I'm just going to show you what the PR interval is, and then this will start to relate later on. Now, just before we do that, something quickly to talk about is how an ECG prints and measures time, because when we look at the intervals and we look at the width of different waves like the QRS or the P wave or whatever, we want to know how long they are, and we measure that in time. So the way we get that is because the ECG paper prints at a constant rate. It prints at a rate of 25 millimeters per second. So when it prints at 25 millimeters per second, you can see the measurements on the ECG paper, and this relates to time. So if we look here, what we can see is that the large boxes represent 5 small boxes. There's sort of 5 small boxes to 1 large box. Those are in millimeters. So 25 millimeters per second means 25 of the smallest boxes makes 1 second. If we do the math, what we see then is every large or darker line is 1/5 of a second, or 0.2 seconds, or to put it another way, would be 200 milliseconds. So these are, and milliseconds is a common way to measure things on an ECG. When you think of milliseconds, sometimes it gets a little crazy, but 200 milliseconds is the same as 0.2 of a second, which is the same as, like 1/5 of a second. So 5 of those makes 1 second. Because that paper prints at a constant rate, we can measure the time on that. And it breaks down where 200 milliseconds is the time between the large boxes, and 0.04 seconds is the time between the tiny boxes, or 40 milliseconds. So if something is 2 small boxes wide, the duration of that is 80 milliseconds. So this becomes relevant as we start to look at our PR interval. So here we're going to look at the PR interval, and it's very simple. The PR interval is simply the time between the start of the P wave and, now this is where it gets a little weird, and the QRS complex, essentially. We call it the PR interval, even though this is a Q wave. If you see a negative deflection after this flat part here, that's a Q wave. If you see, and the positive deflection is going to be an R wave. If you don't see a downward deflection, you just see an upward deflection on ECG, that's an R wave. So what we're measuring is the time from the start of the P wave to basically the QRS complex, but we call it the PR interval because the R is a predominant factor in the QRS complex. So the PR interval goes from the start of the P wave right to the start of the QRS complex. And this is measured in time. So we take a look at how many of those boxes it is and we measure it. Normally, a PR interval is going to be sort of somewhere between 120 and 200 milliseconds. So going back to what we talked about, 120 would be 3 small boxes, because those are 40 milliseconds each, or between the the larger lines is 200. So if it's exactly that, that would be 200 milliseconds. If it's shorter than that, that can suggest that there's potentially a bit of a pathological problem. And if it's longer than that, we start to talk about heart blocks. And I'm gonna just pause there. I just wanted to introduce the PR interval and what it is. We'll get into talking about heart blocks and some of this stuff later on. But for now, that's it for this one. The PR interval, the start of the P wave to the start of the QRS complex, normally about 120 to 200 milliseconds. That's all you need to know. Talk to you soon.